Sabrina Carpenter has had one of the biggest hits in music history, but after talking to a bunch of DJs, there just hasn't been a solid and usable remix of her most popular song. So in this video, we're gonna see if we can remix Sabrina Carpenter's song Espresso into a club-ready house tune that keeps the funk, soul, and sexiness of the original intact, all in just 4 quick steps that even beginner producers can use for their own remix projects. By the end of this video, we're going to see if it's possible to write, structure, mix, and master a professional quality remix in under 6 hours by using a simple production technique that most artists ignore. What you're listening to right now is the finished remix that we'll be breaking down today. Because having produced music for over 15 years, remixing songs in this specific way is easily the fastest and most fun way that I've come across. You can download this video's project files, as well as over 30 full project files inspired by Beatport Top 100 songs, with new files being added weekly. Just visit the link on screen or in the description. And if finishing songs super fast like this is something you'd like help with, you can also download a free bundle of templates, samples, and special bonuses that I use to completely finish one song per week. But for now, let's start with the first of the 4 quick and easy steps we'll be covering today. First, make sure your song is inspired by the quality of a professional example by choosing a reference track. But stop yourself from straight up copying your reference by having a new hook to focus on. For each one of my projects, I like to make a project file page like this to act as a guide to go over all the processes in a little bit more detail. But for this one, the remix track we're working on is Sabrina Carpenter's Espresso. And the main reason that I picked this is because there just didn't seem to be a solid house remix of this that could be used in DJ sets to play on that nostalgia and familiarity of a song that people recognize, but do it in a way that's more dancey and usable in DJ sets. And what I like to do is find that reference track that's going to kind of guide the instrumental, the new instrumental. And what I went with is this cool tune. It's a House of Prayers and Maxim Mate's song, All Night, but it's the Kraza Biza remix of it that I think sounds really, really awesome. It has this very cool disco house, kind of very vibey, fun, summertime kind of vibe to it. And I feel like that fits really well over the tune Espresso. But then the thing is, when you're kind of working on this as an artist yourself, you're coming up with a new hook and the reference track you want to work on, how can you actually know that these two things are compatible and they're going to work together? Well, there's a couple things that I can show you right now. One is actually just kind of playing them over top of each other. You can also play the reference track and kind of sing and hum the lyrics over top of it to kind of get a vibe. But there's also some simple music theory that we can look at to dial this in even further. So one of the first things I'll look at is the key of the tune. So Sabrina Carpenter's Espresso is in the key of C major, and the reference track here is in the key of A major. So they're both in major keys, which is great, but they are not in the exact same key. And what we can do here is, what we can see just by looking at kind of like the piano roll, is that if we're in C, if we go down 1, 2, 3 semitones, we're now in A. So it's very possible for us to kind of pitch them up and have them meet in the middle. And it's not too large of a distance in the keys, where if you're pitching it up too much, it might sound chipmunky, and if you're pitching it down too much, it could lose the original vibe of the tune. So that is a really good sign right there. And then the next is the BPM, so the tempo and the speed of the tune. So Sabrina's song is 104 BPM, and this reference is 126. So it's a bit of a bigger jump. The less, the better. Again, like if it's too large of a jump, you can lose that original awesomeness of the tune, and then it can kind of sound weird and funky. So this is just a good test to kind of make sure that we're going to be on the right track and we can move on knowing that we can build the song in confidence. But really the next big thing is to take this and move it into the DAW. Before I do, just want to mention, if you grab that free toolkit, you'll get access to all these pages. They have a bunch of extra tutorials on here, so I'm going to be going quite fast in some instances, but you can jump into here to check out all the individual tutorials. And a lot of these individual tutorials are also, there's a link in the description where there's a YouTube playlist with all this as well, if you want to stay here on YouTube. With that said, let's jump into Ableton and actually start building this out. All right, so this is a look at the Ableton project file. And one of the first things I'll do whenever starting a new project like this is I'll work on 2 tracks, this reference track here and this arrangement or structure track. So the reference track, I'll drag in the reference track that we want to work on, and I'll set it up so that I'll be able to turn it off and on and flick it back and forth between what we're building here and what we're referencing. And the other thing is I'll use this reference track to also build out this structure track here. So what this is just a bunch of empty MIDI clips color-coded and labeled to show the major sections of the song. And this is useful for a couple of reasons. One is the first thing that we're going to be doing is building out the song vertically, so going layer by layer, basically building out the loop. And then the next thing we'll be doing is building out the song horizontally, which is stretching out this loop into a finished song. And having this structure track is useful because as we're building out vertically, we can jump between each section of the song very easily. Say if we're working on the drums, we want to move over to the intro where the sub comes in, we can focus on the sub over here, those kinds of things. And then when we're working on the full arrangement, we can easily use this to kind of get an idea of where each section of the song should be. If you want a little bit more information on how to do that, on the project file page down at the bottom here, this one here, how to use reference tracks correctly, this video tutorial will show you how to set that up properly. And there'll also be a YouTube playlist in the description for this video if you want to check that video out and keep everything within YouTube. But with that said, once that's set up, the next thing that I'll do is work on the drums. So let's have a work through on that. And the idea here is as I'm building out, I'll be flicking back and forth between the reference and what I'm building, looking for 3 things. The first thing is the pattern, the second thing is the sound selection, and then the third thing is the volumes. That's going to be kind of that 80-20 rule there. So the first thing is the kick. So let's have a look and listen to that. Let's turn off all the drums. So as you can see and hear there, it's your classic 4 on the floor drum pattern. So we got the 1, 2, 3, 4. Nothing too crazy going on there. In fact, usually what I have for this and like the snares and the open hat is the template that I have will automatically have these MIDI clips set in, so I don't have to actually punch in these individual notes. That's a nice little tip there. If you want to check out more, this one here, Pro Ableton Template 12, for easily finishing songs faster, that'll show you a little bit more of how and why I set that up. But that's a look at the pattern there. The next thing would be the sound selection. In this case, what I've done is I've extracted the kick drum from the actual reference track. So the idea here is you want to jump over to maybe the intro or the outro, and you can find a slice where the kick is playing by itself, cut it out, and drag it into a rack like this. And this is a little thing I created called an R kick rack, and it allows you to kind of extract and isolate the kick out a little bit nicer so that you can then either use that kick by itself extracted right from the reference, or you can like right click on it and do show similar files, which will show you sounds that are similar to the kick that you extracted, which can be really nice because you get a more pro quality kick sample from your library as opposed to something that's been taken. In this instance, I preferred the actual kick that I grabbed right from the reference track. And again, if you want to learn a little bit more about how to do that in detail, the video you're going to want to check out is the Better Systems to Steal Kick Samples from Pro Artists. So again, it's on the project file page here as well as in that YouTube playlist. So that covers the pattern and the sound selection. Any other processing there is add a little bit of drum bus, adding a little bit of saturation. I do like adding in this little bit of boom. So if we listen to it without it, and then with it, it adds just a little bit of that like lower end subbiness, which I think particularly could be nice when you're taking it from a track like this. You're kind of extracting it or stealing it from a reference track. You can add a bit more body to the kick sample there. Nothing else going on EQ8 here. I just have this set up where you can see there's a little bit of automation. This is just going to remove the low end more as an arrangement trick throughout the song, almost like a DJ pulling out the lows. So it's not really part of the overall sound. And then just a little bit of K clip here. Just something I do as more of a mixing thing, which we'll cover a little bit in later. Other than that, the main thing is just to flick back and forth between the reference, like how I show you in that other video tutorial, and just try to get the volumes right. The volumes and the sound selection and the pattern, that again is going to be that 80-20 rule, that thing that's going to get you there for 20% of the effort. It's going to get you 80% of the result. It's pretty crazy how important volume can really be there. With that said, the next thing is to start moving through the rest of the drums. So what I'm going to do is just turn these all off, and we're going to go in order as I built them out. Basically, the way that I do this and the way I'd recommend, I suppose, you do it as well, is as you're building out each layer, whether it's for drums or anything really, is listen to the reference track, and then whatever you hear to be the most important element that's sticking out the most, nail that one, and then kind of go in that order of most important to least important. So for me, the first thing I was hearing was this open hi-hat. So let's go ahead and have a look and listen to that. So the pattern here is that offbeat pattern. So on the offbeat, on the offbeat, on the offbeat, very typical for hats and open hi-hats. That's why I have my template set up to already have these notes already in here. And then what I've done is then I believe, I'm wondering if I did any extraction for this. No, I don't believe I did. So basically what I did is I always have basically a curated amount of hi-hats, open hi-hats, and like for any of these tracks, just about to make 3 or 4 or 5 of my favorite sounds, so I don't have to go through like hundreds of sounds each time. And then what I did was I actually think for this one what I did was the similar sound feature. So I did remove like the raw extracted bits, but basically the idea is just to slice out a piece where the hi-hat is playing, and then you can right click it and do show similar sound and then play through similar sounds to that. And what I found was this, and I ended up layering it up with 2 different open hi-hat sounds here. So that kind of gives you a look at the sound selection. And then in terms of the processing, what I have is this sort of channel strip that I've set up. Basically, it's just some EQ. So we're always usually removing a bunch of EQ on the low end, and the hi-hat we're removing quite a bit here. I have this transient designer, which is just removing, playing with the sustain, so like the tail of the sound, so we're tightening it up, a little bit of saturation, and then sometimes I have the ability to do a 1-knob sidechain as well as some width. If you want to learn a little bit more about this, what you're going to want to check out is this VST guide that's in any of the project file pages, and then as well as in the, I think it's called the Minimalist Buyer's Guide in the video, the YouTube playlist, which will show you how to create one of these channel strips and a little bit more about how I created this one. But it's kind of the main moves that I'll do for any of the tracks. But then again, main thing there is flicking back and forth between the reference to get the volume. That's kind of the main thing there. The next thing up is this closed hi-hat. So let's have a look and listen to that. So at first it might look a little bit more complicated than it is, but I'm going to show you kind of the trick here. So for this one, the first thing I'll do with the closed hi-hat is, what I want you to focus on is this. So you can see here, this is actually how I usually start off my closed hi-hats. They're actually just on the off beats, just like the open hi-hat. And what I'll do is I'll just flick between the samples here by kind of going up and down like this, and then flicking back and forth between what I have and the reference until I find a closed hat that sounds like the reference and also kind of like blends in nicely with the open hi-hat, so it almost sounds like one, and it's just adding a little bit more punch to it. And this way it's useful because it's going to make that open hat sound hit a little harder, and it's also useful as an arrangement trick. This way you can pull out the open hi-hat in certain sections of the song and still have like a driving hat sound, so that it just doesn't disappear completely. The next thing that I'll do in this instance is I was listening to the reference and just kind of trying to catch that like kind of skippity sound. And what I'll usually do is like, it looks a little bit more confusing than it is, but usually, like, for example, we just focus on this first like 2 like bars here. It'll start off like this. I'll just kind of pick one sound, and then later I'll move those hats around into different, so that different samples are playing, as a way to kind of add a bit of humanization and interest. So different hi-hat sounds are playing as opposed to one hi-hat sound all the time, which can sound a little bit more robotic and uninteresting. On top of that, something that I'll usually do is just like that, how I kind of had you focus on like this section here, moving in sections at a time, and then what you can do is duplicate that work over and then make a slight adjustment. So if you see here, but the difference between this and this is like this one here has just been moved down here, and then this one down here has just been moved up here. So it looks, like I said, more complicated than it is, but the idea is to kind of use your ear to kind of follow the reference track, and then you can just make some slight adjustments block by block to make it so that it sounds like the sound is evolving over time and a little bit more human, a little bit more natural, a little bit more interesting to listen to. In terms of any processing for this one, we're just removing a bit of the lows here, removing some of the attacks so it's not hitting as hard, removing a little of the sustain so that it's not decaying as long, a little saturation so it's filling out the sound a little bit, and that's pretty much it. The main thing here, again, was to flick back and forth between this sound and the reference, really listening to the hi-hat in that instance and trying to dial in the sound, the samples, and the volume there. So the next thing is, let's see, okay. This time I did things a little bit differently. Usually what I would do is start with, say, like the open hi-hat, the closed hi-hats, then like do the snares and the claps like these here, and then fill out things with kind of more top loops and these kind of like audio loops, basically, to reinforce those core sounds that we made. In this instance, I wasn't feeling that, and I felt like I needed to add a little bit more something going on here. It was the shaker that I was hearing that sounded really, really important. So let's have a look and listen to that. I'm going to solo it as well. So pretty subtle. What I want to point out is a couple things here is when you add like any kind of top loop to your drums, one nice thing to do is if you have it's set to beats and transients, if you have it so that you switch it so it's this right arrow pointing to the right, you can dial back the transients like this so it kind of tightens up the sound a little bit. I feel like it helps it sound less loose and like unprofessional. It helps it kind of blend in a little bit more with the other core sounds. Other than that, removing a whole ton of the low end. A little bit of the attack is getting removed so that it's kind of not hitting as hard. A little bit of one knob sidechain. I explained how that's just all one knob here in that video that I was talking about. But the idea is to not have to mess about with compressors and routing and all that kind of stuff for sidechain, especially if it's just a 4 on the floor kind of kick. And what this is doing is adding a bit of bounce, making room for the kick, and a little bit of this one knob wider, which is just a free plugin, which I've mapped the core knobs to an Ableton rack to make things quicker and easier to work, mix as you go, and not have to be finding things all the time. It's just everything's all there for you. So that's the idea there. Then the main thing again is, even with loops, right, what we're doing is picking the loop, flicking back and forth to the reference and like listening to different loops, trying to find the one that hits the patterns and the sound selection the most, kind of 2 for 1 there, and then just getting that volume dialed in. In this instance, I wanted more shaker, so what we added is this next one. So let's have a look and listen to this. Let's solo it out as well. So it's very similar. It's also like a slightly different vibe of shaker. We're doing similar stuff. We're pulling up the transients a little bit, removing some of the lows, dialing back some of the attack, a little bit of side chain, and then a little bit of width to push it to the left and right, make space for everything in the middle. The next thing I added in was this hi-hat loop. So let's have a look and listen to that. Now let's solo it. So the main thing that you can hear is, as I was building this out, it's a little different than what I would normally do, but the hi-hat groove just wasn't kind of enough with these kind of like MIDI placed sounds. It needed more of that like organic human played kind of touch to things. And so that's why I started to develop the hats more before moving into anything else. So in this instance, just trying to add more of that skippiness to the hat loop that I made, make it sound more human and groovily and shuffly kind of thing. In this instance, I think it's Command A and the Command U to add all these additional little warp marker points, and then setting the groove to a 61, like MPC 61 groove. So that way, I think that's actually happening in all these. No, never mind. Just in some of them. So on this and this. The idea is it slightly moves the hits a little bit and changes the velocity slightly so they're following a particular shuffler groove. And that way, since they're all, or most of the sounds are following that same little groove, kind of makes them sound a little bit more cohesive and work together in a way, as opposed to all flopping and slapping together in different in different kind of styles. That's how. Then it was just a matter of running through the same channel strip kind of idea, removing some lows, a little sidechain, a little width. The main thing again is the volume. And then once that kind of sounded good, what we had was this. So the kick and all like the hats kind of working, and the percussive elements working pretty nicely. The next thing I added in was these claps. So let's have a look and listen to that. So for this, similar to like the open hi-hat, I have this like little rack of claps that I like to use for most of my tunes and seem to work really well. And it seems like a lot of tunes are using them. So when I'm referencing, it works pretty well. And then I have like the standard clap pattern set up here. So I have a hit. It was this one where it started. So on the 2, the 4, and the 2 and the 4. And something that I usually like to do with the claps is have 2 claps. So you can have like one kind of pendulum to the left and one pen to the right. But I also like to have it so they're kind of different ones are hitting at different times. I feel like it just adds a little bit of humanization, a little bit of like difference, a little bit of uniqueness. So it sounds like it's less robotic, basically, is the idea there. In terms of any processing, we're just going through the standard channel strip, removing some of the lows, dialing back the attack a little so it's not hitting as hard, dialing in the sustain a ton so it's a tighter clap. I feel like tighter with the drums usually sounds a little bit more professional. It's the style I find to be going for. And then a little bit of saturation to drive it, make it add a bit of grit and make it sound a little bit fuller. And then a little bit of width to push it to the left and right, add some width, stereo width to the sound. And then don't always do this, but I usually tend to do this, is also reinforce any clap with a snare down the middle. So let's have a listen to that. I'll solo a snare. So pretty subtle stuff. Again, it's just on the 2 and the 4 on the 2 and the 4. And I have like a bunch of snares that I usually like to play with here. And then I think in terms of a little bit of processing, we're just removing some of the lows, dialing back the attack a little bit of saturation. And then the main thing is just kind of, I don't think, this is just kind of reinforcing the clap a little bit. So the idea is to just dial in the volume slowly as you're listening to the clap, and kind of hitting that point where it sounds like they're playing together in a nice way, almost like as if it's one sound. The next thing that we got going on is this kind of bongo loop. So let's have a look and listen to that. Okay, so the idea here is when I was listening to the reference, I definitely heard some kind of cool bongo-ness going on. And what I just did was I looked up like different bongo loops on Splice, and then I just cut them up to kind of get that like little kind of little groove going. So that kind of nails that. And then in terms of any processing, I froze this one. So if you grab the project file, because it does have like a paid plugin like this effect rack here, so you won't need it. But anyways, removing some of the lows and then really shaping out some of the highs, carving out some of the highs so that it's not too distracting. I wanted the bongos to kind of like sit back in the mix a little bit. And then we're removing some of the attack, again, making so it's like sitting back more in the mix, and then removing some of the sustain right here so they isn't decaying as long. A little bit of the one-up sidechain, so it's kind of pumping and grooving making room for the kick, but also kind of giving that like dancey grooveness. And then some saturation, so it's coming out a bit more, adding some grit. And then I believe the effect track was doing some kind of like left and right panning, so you could also use the auto pan for something like that. The next thing is adding in more kind of bongo-y grooves, so let's have a listen to these. Let's solo it out. Let's play the bongos together. The idea there was to add a bit more bongo-ness, a little bit more kind of like a low-end bongo. Again, just looked up stuff on Splice for this and then threw it in here. I don't know if we're doing nothing with a groove or anything like that. So it just kind of works. Removing a bit of low, a little bit of side change so it's pumping, and then a little bit of width so it's pushing to the left and the right, making room for stuff in the middle. And then we have some rides that kind of come in and out of the tune. Not super important. Kind of cool stuff there. That's a pretty good look at the drums. So we can move on to the next bit here. This is what it sounds like, I guess, altogether. Very shakery and groovy and kind of, yeah, like a Ibiza-y, I guess. Next element that I usually like to add in is the bass. And so there's a couple things here. For the pattern, what I like to do is I'll like Command E, a section of like where just the sub is playing. So for example, right here, that's why that comes in handy. And then what you can do is you can drag that into a MIDI clip, a MIDI track. And what it'll do is it will turn that audio to MIDI and kind of get you in the ballpark of what the original, what that reference track's bass notes were playing. Doesn't work all the time, but it does help here, and that's why you can see why the MIDI is like labeled the song like that. And that gives you kind of a starting point. So let's first have a listen to it just with the sub layer. So it's similar to the House of Prayers Ibiza remix version. The main thing here is like first kind of got it sounding similar, or got the notes similar to the House of Prayers tune, and then I was listening to it with like I actually had like the Sabrina Carpenter vocal in here, down here. So sick. And the idea there was to like start by following the notes that were from the reference track and then start adjusting them so that they work well against the vocal. And this is really where I think things can start going in your own favor of like your own originality, because what you're doing is you're no longer like you're starting as an inspiration point with the reference, and then you're listening to that new hook, that reference track. In this example, it's Sabrina's Espresso, and that's going to start helping you shape that sound and shape that like the patterns to match the chord progression to hit the new vocal. And that's where things I think get more interesting, and your natural kind of uniqueness can start to shine through. So that's kind of look at the pattern there. That's how I went about it. If you want to learn more about that, there is a video, because I'm going to show you that in a bit here. The best bass grouping system for massive low end. I do talk about and show that like audio to MIDI example, and then this next thing, which is kind of the bigger thing. When I'm approaching bass, usually what I like to do is start with the sub. And that's why what we're listening to here is just sub. Main reason is it's super simple, and it's very similar to like as if like you were writing a part on like a acoustic guitar or piano. You can really focus on the notes first, but it also helps really dial in the low end. And then what you can do is then add in a mid bass layer to add the character. So what we have here is this little V sub thing that I've created. It's basically just a sine wave, super clean, awesome low end. And then we have a separate track that is routing in the MIDI from this track. So you can see instead of all ins, it's subs. And then we're using a pitch device to just punch it up and down. This way I have it set up so you can go like up a whole octave or down a whole octave. This way, if the sub sounds good at a certain octave, but your mid bass doesn't, then you're fine. You don't need to like copy things over. And this is just useful because as you're like building up the tune, if you change, imagine you have this all figured out here like this, and then you decide you want to change the bass line in some way, and you have to copy and paste it over 1,000 times. It's just a lot faster and easier. And then this way what we can do is we have this mid bass layer, and we can just turn this on next and solo it. So you can see most of the bass sound is coming from the sub, and then we're adding a little bit of saturation to kind of like get that in-between point of the sub and the mid bass layer with a little bit of saturation. And then a lot of like that mid character for me is coming from this like this bass guitar sample that I really like. We're removing a bunch of the lows so that it's not interfering with the sub, and then some side chains so that it's pumping. If you want to learn a little bit more about this kind of grouping system that I've set up here, definitely check out that video that I mentioned. But this is a pretty reliable way I've been finding to have really solid like low end. And this way you have like the subs is in one area sounding pure and awesome, and then you just worry about the character on another layer without worrying about it wrecking that pure awesome low end. So this is what that sounds like all together. Cool. So then we're just going to go through some of the melodic stuff. So what I want to add in first is just the vocal real quick. So I think I should mention, like, one of the things is I add in this vocal, like I think I use Lala in this instance to have an no, actually I found an acapella of the vocal and have it in here. And that way, as you're like even building up the drums, you can listen to the vocal and make sure that what you're doing is sounding a little bit more unique to the vocal hook. So at this point, like when I was building up this bass, I was listening to this vocal quite a bit. I'm just going to play it a bit. There's like copyright issues, obviously, but So fucking sick. I think the cool thing, the main takeaway here is whether it's a remix or not, having like a main hook that you're working against is really going to help you like make proper decisions because you're developing everything in service of that main hook. So I just want to go over this quickly before we go over any more of the melodic elements. So I just threw the vocal in here. We're using that standard channel strip again, removing some of the lows, making room for like the sub and the kick to take up that area, making sure it's not too muddy. A little bit of the sustain is getting removed, so it's tightening up the vocal. And then a little bit of this one knob saturation, or one knob side chain, so it's making room for the kick, and then also kind of pumping the vocal in that kind of dance music-y way, and doing it in a way where I don't have to spend any time, again, routing compressors and all that kind of annoying stuff, at least for me. And that's really it. Nothing too much going on the vocal here. I have a separate vocal track here where I think, let's hear what this is. It's just one little bit where on this track, on the send, I have a delay here. So it's just more of an arrangement-y kind of thing. But that's it. I just wanted to go over that before we go into melodic stuff, because everything else here, I usually will be doing everything in context. So I'm not building up elements one by one, listening to them by themselves. Always listening with like everything. Playing the vocal and the bass and the drums and everything. And while mixing as well. This way you're doing everything in context, making sure it doesn't sound good just by itself. It sounds good as like a total unit, always in service of the song. So with that said, let's go over some of these more melodic parts. Okay, I have a few here that I have to remember that I did not fuck with. I'm just gonna kill these for now. Cool. So let's go one by one in order as I built them out, starting with whatever this was. And turning it on for you, there you go. So what this is why it's useful to find like the key of the tune. I just looked up, I don't know what it must have been, funky or soul or something in Splice, and just flicked around Splice until I found something that I liked in the same key, and just dropped it in here, and you can hear it just kind of like cut it up. Kind of made my own little like trance skate kind of thing. Kind of cool, weird little cutting things up a little bit. And yeah, just cut it up so it's not the exact same loop. And then we're moving a bunch of the lows, making sure that that's nice and free. And then removing a bunch of the high, more kind of shaping it, making it sound a little bit more like kind of lo-fi-ish, I guess you could almost say. A little bit of sidechain so it's pumping, and then a little bit of width so it's pushing it to the left and the right. Then we're adding in, I think, a bunch of guitar sounds. So let's listen to the next layer. Let's hear it by itself. So I think that's kind of like a swelly, guitar-y sound that I was kind of hearing in the reference track. I was just looking up like funky electric guitar stuff, samples in Splice to find that. And then removing a bit of the lows, removing some of the highs, a little sidechain, similar processing really. And then this one's panned a little to the left. And then what we have is this next one here, panned a little to the right. And then actually, oh man, I think that sounds so sweet. But let's have a listen to it. So basically, I just kind of cut up so it's going like in kind of relation to the rest of the melodic elements. And they all kind of work together. Throw in the vocal too. Can I? Cool. Yeah, so the idea here is just to know the key of like what you're working with here. That's why that first step was so important that I mentioned at the beginning of the video. And then just like look for things, soulful, funky, melodic loops, whatever, and then use your ear to kind of puzzle piece things together, cut things up a little bit so that they all work together. And the idea is to make them, even though these are all different samples from different sample packs and stuff, kind of all, they're bouncing together and they're kind of working together and they work against the vocal. And that's really the idea there. That's pretty simple stuff, just 3 main melodic layers all together, excluding the vocal. We have this. pretty smooth with a vocal. Just like that, pretty simple stuff. And then one of the last things is I always have these effects group layers here. Just want to show you kind of roughly what this looks like. Usually it's like reverse crashes going into crashes, little like downlifters, riser sounds, that kind of stuff, little snare rolls. And that's why it's so important to have this structure track up at the top here, because once I built up this main loop, it was just a matter of like copying, pasting things over, and then listening to what was going on in the song, like flicking back to the reference at this point and this point and this point and this point, and then adjusting my layers that it kind of follows the same flow. So if we go back to the project file page here, I have some more information on that, and on the project file page here I also have a look at that structure if you want to ever have a look at it. And there's a few extra, these are all videos here. So this goes over the structure track thing I was talking about, split monitoring, which is again using the reference track here. And this video here is what you'd want to check out. This goes over like how I go about all these different little transition effects. That's all these like little like laser sounds and stuff like that. It really fills out the track a lot. And this could be I think it's important to check out that video, because this is what's that like, you finished it, it feels like it's not enough. There's like 3 melodic layers, 1 vocal layer, 1 bass line, and a couple of like drum parts. It's like, that must not be enough, right? But then you add in the little swooshes and lasers and crashes, and it fills out the song, makes it sound a lot more professional and filled out. So definitely check that out. And there's a little bit of extra information here, how to finish up the song, 3 things rule, mixing, mastering, that kind of stuff. Yeah, hopefully you found this video useful. And yeah, let's go over a review of the 80-20 rule now. Hi, my friend, Matt from Best Friends Club here. And if you've been paying attention to this super long video, then you've probably figured out what the 80-20 rule is when it comes to building out your songs. The goal here is to get 80% of the result with only 20% of the time, energy, and effort. And because the first key to the 80-20 rule here is to use a reference track, we're making sure that we're very easily hitting 80% of a high quality, professionally made song. In particular, we use that reference track to make sure that we're picking the right notes, sounds, and volumes as we're building out our song. The second key of the 80-20 rule here is to mix as you go in an extremely streamlined way by only focusing on the volume of each track, as well as using a simple repeatable channel strip for each track that we're adding to our songs. The third and final key is to repurpose your old project files and have a suite of powerful templates, Ableton racks, and one-knob effects that you've personalized and curated over time. If you'd like to get a head start by downloading all the racks, templates, and all the files that you've seen me use in the Ableton project file for this video, or if you'd just like to take a closer look at any of the techniques or tracks you saw me work on in this video at your own pace, you can find a link to this video's project files on screen now, and at the second link that's in the YouTube description. I'm recreating a different song from the Beatport top charts every single week and making the project files available to anyone who wants them. You'll also get access to a private Discord where you can ask me and the community questions, as well as share tracks for feedback. If you or your music are not quite ready for a shot in the arm like that, I've also made you a completely free bundle of templates, samples, and special bonuses that have helped me figure out how to completely finish one new song each and every single week. And you can grab that free Ultimate Song Finishing Toolkit by visiting the first link that's in the YouTube description here. However, if you just feel like staying on YouTube for now, that's totally fine. Save that link for later, and check out this playlist filled with videos just like the one you just watched, where I completely create songs inspired by tracks found in the Beatport top charts. Or if you really want to take what you've learned in this video to the next level, make sure you check out this video right here.